I sat at the end of the dining table, my old faded suit clinging to my shoulders, while around me echoed lively laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. The house on Willow Creek glowed like a palace, filled with guests, all business associates of my son-in-law, Ethan Carter. I stayed silent, poking at the half-eaten piece of meat on my plate, trying to blend into the atmosphere but feeling only out of place. This house was built with my sweat, every piece of wood, every brick bearing the mark of my hands. Now I was just a shadow sitting quietly in a corner, like an uninvited guest in what was once my home. When it was time for a toast, Ethan stood, his smile radiant, his voice firm with the confidence of a man used to commanding a crowd. Thank you all for joining us. A spacious home, a warm dinner, all thanks to the support of family and friends, and of course my father-in-law, Thomas. All eyes turned to me, and for a fleeting moment I almost felt a spark of warmth, but Ethan continued. He's been with us for over a year now, since Rachel's mother passed. Now Rachel and I think it's time for him to have his own space, somewhere more comfortable, a place suited to his age, quiet, convenient. We've prepared an apartment downtown for him. We'll cover all the costs. He just needs to pack up and move in after this week. Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. Some nodded, others raised their glasses in praise. Thoughtful, so considerate. They looked at Ethan like he was the model son-in-law, dutifully caring for his aging father-in-law. I forced a stiff smile, but my heart felt crushed. My own space? More comfortable? I understood. This wasn't a kind gesture, it was a polished way of saying, leave this house, it's no longer yours. Rachel sat beside me, her eyes red, avoiding my gaze. I saw her hand tremble slightly under the table, but she didn't speak against it. Ethan had spoken for both of them, and I knew if she dared to object, he'd grip her shoulder tightly in an instant. I took a deep breath, swallowing my anger to avoid an outburst in front of everyone. My rough hands rested on the table, calluses stark under the crystal chandelier's light. To outsiders, this looked like a filial act, but I felt each of Ethan's words as a slap, denying the life I'd built, denying my right to exist in this home. As the party wound down and guests left, their handshakes and compliments rang in my ears. You're lucky to have such a caring son-in-law. I smiled stiffly, my mouth dry as ash. When the door closed, leaving just the three of us, Ethan set his glass down and looked straight at me. His smile vanished. His voice dropped colder. I said it in front of everyone to spare you embarrassment. But honestly, Thomas, it's time for you to go. This is mine and Rachel's house now. You staying here just makes things heavy. The apartment's ready. 1 week you move. No more flowery words. No more pretense of politeness. Just a blunt command. Rachel turned away, tears falling down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. I stood, pulling my suitcase from the corner of the closet. The sound of its wheels scraping the wooden floor echoed through the room, heavy like the closing of a coffin on my last illusions. I paused at the threshold, glancing around the room one last time. Family photos now mingled with pictures of Rachel and Ethan from their lavish vacations. To the guests, I was a man well cared for by his son-in-law. To myself, I was an exile, evicted from the territory I'd built. Outside, the Texas night wind cut through my collar, but the chill in my heart was colder. I stepped out, hearing the door slam shut behind me, the lock clicking dryly. No one saw me off. Neighbors saw an old man with an old suitcase walking in the night, probably thinking I was being kindly relocated by my son-in-law. They didn't see the fire igniting within me. Ethan thought he'd handled it cleverly, maintaining his image as a thoughtful man. But he forgot one thing. I'm not just an old man. I'm someone who built from nothing, and when necessary, I know how to destroy. I left that glowing mansion in an old taxi, my suitcase lying haphazardly in the back seat. The only proof I'd ever belonged to that house. The elderly driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, perhaps wanting to ask something but staying silent when he saw my face. I didn't want to explain. How could I say I'd just been politely kicked out of the home I built, under the guise of care that everyone applauded? Dallas at night stretched out, its glamorous lights reflecting on wet asphalt, but to me everything was cold. I told the driver to stop at a motel outside downtown, where a flickering neon sign read "Vacancy in the Wind." The room was just big enough for a bed, with stained walls and an air conditioner that whined intermittently. I set my suitcase in the corner, sank onto the sagging mattress, and heard the springs creak. No Rachel to remind me to take my pills. No familiar laughter from the one who was gone. Just the rumble of trucks on the highway outside. The next day, I woke early out of habit, brewing cheap coffee in a leaky machine. The burnt, bitter taste hit my tongue, but I drank it all. It kept me sharp. I walked to a nearby store, bought a cold sandwich, and returned to the room. They say aging makes you used to loneliness, but the truth is, no one easily accepts waking up one day with no home to return to. I looked at my suitcase in the corner, a silent companion, and told myself this was temporary. I spent the afternoon by the window, watching people pass by. Across the street, a real estate office advertised luxury homes, easy loans. Each glowing mansion photo stung my eyes. I thought of Ethan, his polished smile, his clever words about me needing a quieter place, a flawless performance that made the audience see him as compassionate, while in reality, he'd stripped me of both my home and my dignity. That evening, I turned on the TV, flipping channels endlessly, but every show only deepened the emptiness. I shut it off, sitting in the dark, letting memories flood in, not the happy ones, but Ethan's cold stare as the door closed. That look said it all. You're just a burden. I clenched my fists, my knuckles cracking. He thought I'd sit here waiting to die, accepting this makeshift life. He didn't know I'd built from nothing before, and those who build can also destroy. A week passed, and I settled into the motel's rhythm. I got to know the night manager, a hefty guy who read financial papers. From his small talk, I caught whispers about Carter Constructions, Ethan's company struggling with some major projects delayed. I stayed quiet but memorized every detail. I started visiting the public library, reading up on the construction industry. Each number, each financial report was like a brick. I knew how to stack bricks into a house, and now I was learning to stack them into a weapon. One afternoon, returning from the library, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No sender. Inside was a printed sheet about a mortgage on the Willow Creek house. Ethan's name was listed as the owner. He'd used my house as collateral for his company. I sank onto the bed's edge, my heart pounding. His fake laughter from the party echoed in my head. We've prepared everything for him. He hadn't just kicked me out, he'd wagered my life's work on his reckless business games. That night, I stepped onto the motel's small balcony. The Texas sky was full of stars, but I only saw the glow of distant buildings. My hand gripped the rusty railing tightly. The humiliation in my chest turned into a cold fire. They thought they'd erased me from their lives, but these days of exile were just the beginning. I'd find my way back, not to beg to stand in that house again, but to stand over the ashes of the man who cast me out. Ethan had opened the door to a storm he never saw coming. In the days that followed, I paid closer attention to news about Ethan's company. At first, it was just snippets in local papers. A mall project in Fort Worth delayed, subcontractors grumbling about unpaid bills. But the more I read, the clearer the picture became. A crumbling portrait of Carter Constructions, the empire Ethan bragged about at parties. One night, digging through archived financial reports at the public library, my eyes locked on a short-term debt table. The numbers were alarmingly high, and stranger still, some loans were signed just months after I'd moved in with Rachel and Ethan. A chill ran down my spine. He'd taken out massive loans, not just against the company but using personal assets. I flipped to another page, my heart racing. The Willow Creek house, the one I'd been arranged to leave, was collateral for a loan. Laughable. The home I'd built with my sweat and savings was now a bargaining chip in his business casino. I brought the stack of documents back to the motel, spreading them on the table like playing cards. Each figure, each date, told a story Ethan wanted hidden. Mounting interest, delayed contracts, choked cash flow. He still dressed sharply, threw lavish parties, and boasted about his thriving company. But he was sitting on a powder keg, and I realized why he needed me gone. A father-in-law living in the house, with a lifetime in construction, might see the cracks, ask questions he didn't want to answer. Better to push me out, keep the coming collapse his secret. One morning, picking up mail in the motel lobby, I found an envelope misaddressed to Carter Constructions but sent to my exact room. I hesitated, then took it upstairs. Inside was a letter from a Houston bank, warning of overdue interest payments. A short, heavy threat. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in foreclosure proceedings. I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking. Just as I'd suspected, Ethan was broke. He couldn't keep up. That afternoon, I called an old friend, Frank Martinez, a retired electrical contractor. Frank gave a dry laugh when I asked about Carter Constructions. That Ethan kid, he's been stiffing workers for months. Some stay quiet, hoping to get paid. Others are getting loud. I hear a few crews are gearing up to sue. Thomas, be careful. Getting tangled with him now is like grabbing a knife by the blade. I thanked Frank, but I wasn't afraid. His words were fuel on the fire, smoldering inside me. That evening, I returned to the library, diving into corporate records. Annual reports, shareholder lists, public contracts, they formed a maze of numbers. I spent hours scanning, jotting down names. Then I found it. Carter Constructions wasn't fully Ethan's. He owned only about 45% of the shares. The rest were held by individual investors. If I could reach the right people, gather enough votes, I could flip the board. The empire he boasted about was more fragile than I'd thought. I leaned back in my chair, a vision spinning in my mind. A mortgaged house, a company drowning in debt, shares split among many. Ethan had pushed me out to hide his mess, but that only opened my eyes. He thought he held all the cards, but he was standing on the edge, needing just one push. The next day, I bought a thick notebook and began logging every detail: debts, due dates, major shareholders, contract values. I called it my battlefield map. Each number was a brick, and someone who'd stacked bricks to build a home, would now stack them to build a path to revenge. Late that night, I stood by the motel window, watching highway lights flicker. Ethan's voice from the party echoed, "He needs a quieter place." He thought I'd sit here, sipping cheap coffee, watching an old clock tick away. But I was watching his every move, collecting every scrap of evidence. And I knew, when the time came, I'd strike where he least expected, the financial heart of Carter Constructions. That night, I wrote at the top of a notebook page, "When he took my home, he gave me a reason to take his empire." For the first time since leaving Willow Creek, I smiled. Not the smile of a defeated man, but of someone who'd found the thread to start a counterattack. A week after I began mapping my battlefield, I overheard that Ethan and Rachel were hosting an intimate gathering at the Hilton in downtown Dallas. It was a meet and greet for potential investors and contractors, a chance for Ethan to polish his struggling company's image. I wasn't invited, of course, but word spreads fast in the coffee shops where old contractors like me hang out. An old friend half joked, "You should go, Thomas. See how he's spinning his lies." At first I brushed it off, but a restless urge took hold. If I wanted to know his game, I needed to see it firsthand. That evening, I threw on my old coat and slipped into the hotel. The grand lobby sparkled, crystal chandeliers casting cold light on polished marble floors. I stood at the end of a hallway, close enough to hear the lively laughter and clinking glasses. Through the open doors, I saw Ethan in a tailored navy suit, hair slicked back, his tongue smooth as a politician's on the campaign trail. Rachel sat beside him, her smile forced but holding a veneer of harmony. Ethan raised his glass, his voice carrying across the room. "Carter Constructions is entering a new phase. We have big projects, lucrative contracts, and of course incredible support from family. As you know, my father-in-law, Thomas Walker, has retired to enjoy his golden years. He's moved to a comfortable apartment, and our home is now a private space to focus on work. It's the natural order." The room erupted in laughter, punctuated by applause. I stood frozen in the hallway, blood rushing to my face. He'd turned my humiliating eviction into a tale of retiring to enjoy old age, and the crowd swallowed it whole. To them, he was the dutiful son-in-law, the man who took care of his father-in-law, and I, in his words, was just an old man needing a more suitable place. Each laugh in that room was a dagger twisting in my chest. I gripped the hallway railing, my knuckles whitening. Decades of work, every callus on my hands proved I'd never needed anyone to arrange a place for me. Yet here, among strangers, I was reduced to a prop in his performance. Rachel sat silent, offering no objection, her eyes flickering to her wine glass as if to escape. Her silence hurt more than Ethan's words. Then I heard something that made my heart drop. An investor asked, "But are you sure your funding is stable, Ethan? There's talk of unpaid debts." Ethan laughed, answering as if he'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. "I assure you, if needed, my father-in-law is always ready to back me. He trusts me completely. Thomas once said, 'That house is your future, Ethan.'" I froze. That was a bald-faced lie. I'd never said those words. But here, he used my name, my reputation, as proof for his empty promises. I saw nods of approval around the table, trusting eyes. They believed him because they didn't know. But I understood. Ethan hadn't just taken my home. He'd taken my voice, turning it into a tool to borrow more. I stepped back, avoiding notice as I eavesdropped. My throat tightened with both rage and humiliation. That day I learned a lesson. Some betrayals don't need to be shouted in your face. They're wrapped in smiles and red wine. To the crowd, it was a warm family story. To me, it was public humiliation, decorated with applause. I left the hotel in silence, stepping into Dallas's night air. The yellow streetlights stretched long, reflecting my shadow on the sidewalk like a homeless wanderer. But in my chest, the fire burned fiercer than ever. Ethan thought he'd cleverly made me a silent witness to his performance. But he didn't know I'd seen through him and remembered every word. I knew exactly what he was hiding, and I knew what I had to do next. Back at the motel, I spread my notebook on the table. I added a line. He didn't just steal my home. He borrowed my name to build his house of cards. That house will fall when the tide comes. And I, Thomas Walker, was ready to be that tide. I couldn't sleep after leaving the Hilton. The fake applause and Ethan's "my father-in-law trusts me completely" echoed in my head like a haunting refrain. I sat alone in the motel room, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the peeling walls. My notebook spread open before me, the numbers on debts, the scraps of information I'd gathered, now lined up like evidence in an indictment. But I couldn't do it alone. To take down Ethan, I needed an ally who knew the game, who could turn data into a weapon. The next morning, I went to a small coffee shop in South Dallas to meet Mark Jensen. Mark was a lawyer specializing in real estate and construction contracts. We'd known each other for over 20 years from when I ran big projects. He'd once helped me settle a dispute with a shady contractor. I wasn't sure he'd agree to hear me out after so long, but when I called, just mentioning my name, he paused for a few seconds and said, "Let's meet. Tomorrow morning, usual spot." The coffee shop was quiet, the smell of roasted beans sharp in the air. I took a corner table by the window. Mark showed up looking familiar. White dress shirt, loose tie, gray hair neatly combed. He set his coffee down and looked straight at me. "Thomas, you've aged a lot, but your eyes, they're different. Something's brewing." I told him everything, from the party at Ethan's, to being arranged out of my home, to the debt papers I'd found. I showed him the bank envelope, photocopied financial reports, and my notebook entries. Mark flipped through each page, his face growing serious. When I finished, he sighed. "I'm not surprised. I've met Ethan a few times at bidding meetings. He's got a slick tongue, but I know his type. Big ambitions, short on ability, living off flash and loans. One day he'll crash." I gripped my coffee mug, my voice low. "That day needs to come sooner, Mark, and I want to be the one to push him." Mark studied me for a moment, his eyes sharp. Then he leaned forward, voice low. "If you're serious, I can help. But understand, this is a dangerous game. Ethan's not alone. He's got shareholders, banks, his own lawyers." But, he paused, a slight smirk forming. "Everything has a weak spot," he explained. "Most of Carter Construction's shareholders weren't loyal to Ethan. They invested for profit, and when the ship starts leaking, they'd look for an exit. If you can gather enough shares, you could oust Ethan. I know a few who are fed up with his management. They're just waiting for a reason." Hearing this, a spark ignited in me. Not just revenge, but a concrete plan. Use his own company to bring him down. We talked for 2 hours. Mark scribbled quickly in a leather notebook, listing names of prominent investors who'd grumbled about Ethan in meetings. He also knew a major shareholder, a real estate developer named Richard Evans, who'd been slighted by Ethan in a deal and held a grudge. If you can sway Evans, that's your leverage. Before we parted, Mark looked at me long and hard. "Thomas, one last time, do you just want your dignity back, or do you want to crush Ethan?" I answered without hesitation. "I want him to feel everything I've felt, and more." Mark nodded. "Then we start." In the days that followed, Mark and I quietly reached out to some shareholders. We never mentioned my name directly. Mark acted as the intermediary, talking about a discreet investor looking to buy shares. Some were hesitant, but others were eager. They were fed up with Ethan, and the prospect of cashing out with some profit made them easy to sway. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Ethan from afar. Newspapers reported on Carter Construction's delayed projects, budgets doubling. Ethan still gave interviews, flashing a confident smile, blaming weather and supply chains. But I knew that smile was hiding fear. One evening, alone in my motel room, I stared at the scraps of paper covering the walls. Shareholder names, debts, meeting schedules, due dates. The tiny room had become a paper battlefield. I thought of Ethan, of his eyes as he locked the door behind me, leaving me to walk away like an unwanted guest. Back then, he thought he'd won. But now he didn't know I had an ally, and every step he took was under my watch. A week later, Mark called me. His voice crackled through the phone. "I just got word. Ethan's scrambling for new capital. He's holding another shareholder meeting to pitch a plan to save the company. If you want to strike, that's the moment." I was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Then we'll be there. But not as guests. We'll show up as the ones he never expected to return." As I hung up, I looked in the mirror. My face was aged, hair gray, wrinkles deep, but in my eyes I saw a fire I'd never had before. Ethan thought he'd erased me from his life, but I was coming back in the shadows, with an alliance strong enough to flip the board. And this time, when I stepped through the doors of his company, no one would push me out. I started calling this phase the first steps. Quiet, unnoticed, but each one leaving an indelible mark. After the discreet meetings Mark Jensen arranged, I knew one thing clearly. Many of Carter Construction's shareholders were sick of Ethan. They weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to profit. And when the ship started leaking, anyone offering a lifeboat could pull them to their side. I decided I'd be that person. Mark guided me on using a shell company, an LLC registered under a trusted friend's name, to handle the transactions. "Your name can't surface, Thomas," Mark warned. "Not until we have enough shares to force Ethan out of his chair." I nodded, understanding this game required patience and secrecy. Over the next few weeks, I visited the bank multiple times. With my remaining retirement funds and a stash of savings I'd kept hidden, I scraped together enough to buy the first batch of shares. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small shareholder, an old engineer who'd invested just to stay connected to construction, sold me his entire stake. As he signed the papers, he said, "I've got no faith left. That company's going under sooner or later." I just smiled, not telling him I was the one preparing for that day. Mark brought more good news. Richard Evans, the real estate developer Ethan had crossed, agreed to a private meeting. It took place in a small second-floor office in an old building. Evans, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, listened to Mark's pitch, then turned to me. I remember you. Thomas Walker. You ran the highway project in Arlington, didn't you? I nodded. Evans gave a faint smile. You kept your word back then. Ethan's different. He owes me more than money. He owes me my pride. I want to see him lose everything. So what do you need from me? I spoke plainly. No sugarcoating. I need your vote. I need you to sell your shares to my shell company. And when the time comes, I need you to back me to kick Ethan out of his chair. Evans let out a dry laugh, pouring whiskey into a glass. Old man, I like your directness. Deal. But make sure you can make him hurt, not just bleed. Leaving that office, I knew I'd laid a crucial brick on the path to revenge. The share acquisitions moved slowly but steadily. Each transaction I meticulously logged in my notebook. Dates, share counts, names crossed off. I watched the list grow, one by one, deserting Ethan's side. He still didn't know, still busy throwing parties, giving interviews, boasting about a bright future. He had no idea that from within I was dismantling the foundation beneath him, brick by brick. One afternoon, I sat in my motel room, walls covered in notes. I connected the information with red lines. The diagram looked like a military campaign map. Mark saw it and chuckled. You've turned this room into a war zone, I replied. I used to build houses with blueprints. Now I'm tearing down a man with one. We didn't just buy shares, we subtly spread rumors. Mark whispered a few words to a financial reporter. That Carter Constructions was desperately seeking rescue funds. That shareholders were losing patience. The article appeared on the back page of a major paper, but it was enough to stir ripples. Days later, another shareholder called Mark, wanting to offload shares. I knew the domino effect had begun. Ethan kept boasting. One evening, I saw him on a local news segment, speaking next to a project blueprint. We're expanding, gearing up for a booming era. I sat in my dark room, smirking. He didn't know that every time he opened his mouth, another shareholder wanted out, seeing the gap between his promises and reality. After 2 months, Mark and I held nearly 30% of the shares through discrete deals. Not more than Ethan, but enough to balance the scales. More importantly, we had Evans and a few other strategic shareholders ready to vote against him when the time came. I remember that evening when Mark brought the latest signed documents. He set them on the table, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. Thomas, we've crossed the line, no turning back now. I opened the file, seeing my shell company's name next to the list of major shareholders. A wave of both satisfaction and trembling ran down my spine. I stood and walked to the small balcony. Below, the highway roared with traffic. I stared at the flickering lights, a clear thought rising. Ethan had stolen my home. Now, day by day, signature by signature, I was stealing his company. The first steps were complete, and when he realized, it would be too late. One early March morning, I went to a bank branch in downtown Dallas to finalize the transfer of newly purchased shares. As usual, I wore simple clothes, a faded shirt, an old jacket to avoid attention. I signed the papers with a steady hand, but my heart raced. Each signature was a chisel strike at the foundation under Ethan's feet. When I finished, I carefully tucked the documents into a leather bag, ready to leave the lobby. Just then, a familiar voice rang out behind me, half joking, half mocking. Well, my dear father-in-law banks here too? I turned. Ethan strode in, his dark blue suit perfectly fitted, red tie demanding attention. He flashed a slick smile at the receptionist before heading straight toward me. Didn't expect to see you in a place like this, he said, loud enough for a few bystanders to hear. I thought you were enjoying your golden years in that apartment we set up for you. I stayed silent, eyes fixed on the documents in my hand. I knew he was trying to provoke me, to make me a public laughingstock. But this time, I didn't feel humiliated. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Just some personal business, I said curtly. Ethan laughed, leaning closer, whispering, You know, sometimes I think you should thank me. Without me, you'd just be a lonely old man in a rotting house. I gave you a place, gave you dignity, but you keep making things hard for yourself. I looked him in the eye, my voice slow. What you gave me wasn't a place. It was an eviction notice. For a split second, his smile faltered, but then he laughed loudly, clapping my shoulder like I'd told a joke. Still bitter about that? Come on, don't be so sensitive. Everyone knows when you get old, you step aside for the younger generation. That's the rule. I gathered my papers, picked up my bag. As I passed him, I paused, lowering my voice so only he could hear. The only rule I believe in is this: those who build on lies will fall, and they fall faster than they think. Ethan's brow twitched briefly, but he quickly masked it with a smug grin. Threatening me? You've got nothing left to lose, Thomas. Don't waste your energy. I turned and walked out, letting his words fall into the void. But I knew he'd heard me, and in his eyes I caught a flicker of unease. Just a flicker, but enough to show the first crack had appeared in the confident facade he wore. Outside, the Dallas wind blew hard, carrying dust and the sound of car horns. I took a deep breath, my chest swelling. This unexpected confrontation didn't shake me. It was like a drumbeat rallying troops. Ethan didn't yet know I was back in the game, but he would soon. And when that day came, he'd remember this moment at the bank. The moment he laughed loudly while I smiled quietly, like a man who knew victory was near. I left the bank that morning with my mind taut as a wire. The unexpected run-in with Ethan left a heavy aftertaste. But it also showed me something. He was starting to get wary. My words, though just a whisper, had planted a seed of doubt in his head. That was good. A nervous man makes mistakes. But to go further, I needed another blade, evidence he couldn't hide behind his polished smile. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Late one evening, as I jotted down figures in my motel room, my phone rang. Rachel. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. Her voice was small and shaky. Dad, can we talk? But please don't tell Ethan. We arranged to meet at a small diner on the outskirts, where no one would notice. Rachel walked in wearing a long coat, her hat pulled low. Her eyes were full of tension, her hands gripping her coffee mug until they turned white. I sat across from her, waiting for her to speak. I can't take it anymore, Dad, she whispered, eyes red. Ethan, he's not just controlling or cruel to you. He's betrayed me too. My heart tightened. I asked slowly, what do you mean? Rachel choked out. He's seeing someone else, a young assistant at the company. I found texts, photos. I confronted him. He denied it, then blamed me for being paranoid. I haven't told anyone, but I knew you'd understand. I sat still, my heart both aching and cold. I'd prepared for Ethan's fake numbers, his financial schemes, but hearing he'd betrayed my daughter, my only flesh and blood, cut deeper than any knife. Rachel bowed her head, her voice breaking. Dad, I don't know what to do. I've given up so much for him, even defended him when he kicked you out. I feel so ashamed. I placed my hand on the table, my voice hoarse. You don't need to feel ashamed, Rachel. The only one who should is him. You gave him a chance, and he's abused it all. Rachel looked at me, her eyes both desperate and hopeful. Dad, what are you going to do? I didn't answer right away, but inside I knew I'd just gained another weapon, a family secret, one that could shatter the perfect image Ethan worked so hard to build. The next day, I hired a private investigator. An old contact in the industry introduced me to Cole, a man in his 40s, a former cop who quit due to bureaucratic frustration. What do you need from me? Cole asked, his cunning eyes glinting behind cigarette smoke. I need proof, photos, texts, anything showing Ethan Carter's affair with his assistant. I need the truth, not rumors. Cole nodded, smirking. If it's real, I'll find it. Guys like him always leave a trail. A week later, Cole called, his voice excited. Mr. Walker, you're going to want to see this. We met at a quiet bar. Cole slid a thick envelope across the table. I opened it, revealing photos of Ethan and a young brunette, often hand in hand leaving hotels. Some images were so blatant I had to look away, humiliated for Rachel. Alongside the photos were copied texts, flirtatious words, planned meetups, even discussions about how Rachel just handles the family. I handle the company. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Each photo, each line, poured gasoline on my burning hatred. Ethan wasn't just greedy. He was a liar, a traitor, betraying both his wife and his father-in-law. I also found he's using company funds to pay for her, Cole continued, voice steady. Company card-covered restaurants, hotels, clear paper trail. I folded the envelope, thanked Cole, and a plan formed in my mind. To topple Ethan, I didn't just need to prove his financial failure. I needed to prove his moral failure. Shareholders might overlook debts if they hoped for profit. But when they saw the CEO squandering company money on a mistress, betraying his family in the very house he used to boast about, that would be the fatal blow. That evening, I met Rachel again. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it toward her. She opened it, trembling as she looked at the photos. Tears fell, but there were no more desperate sobs, just a heavy silence. You sacrificed for him, I said slowly, but he never valued it. Now you see him clearly. Rachel nodded, wiping her tears. Dad, do what you have to. If you need me to testify, I will. I looked at my daughter, and for a moment I saw her as the little girl clinging to me in a summer rain. But she was no longer a child needing protection. She was a living witness to Ethan's rot. I took her hand, saying softly, Don't worry. He thought he made me irrelevant, but he's the one about to lose everything. I'll take care of it. As Rachel left the diner, I stayed behind, hand on the envelope. Outside, traffic roared. Inside me, a cold but certain thought echoed. The family secret was exposed, and it was the bullet I'd used to end his career. That night, I taped the photos to my motel room wall, next to the shareholder diagram in red lines. Each image was a perfect piece of the plan. I whispered to myself, like a vow. The day he used his smile to make me useless, he signed his own death warrant. Now I have the proof. Now he'll pay. I sat in my motel room, facing a war wall, company documents, shareholder lists, red lines connecting names. and now mixed in the photos of Ethan's affair that Cole had given me. Each piece was vital, but I knew I had to choose the right moment and method to deploy them. The evidence I held wasn't just a marital secret, it was leverage, and in a chess game, leverage decides the winner. I called Mark Jensen. When he stepped into the room, his eyes scanned the wall, and he let out a low whistle. "Thomas, you've turned this place into a command center." I didn't reply, just handed him the envelope. Mark opened it, flipping through the photos, then looked at me with a mix of shock and unease. "Good Lord. With this, you could bury him alive." I poured us 2 cups of coffee, my voice low. "No, I don't want to bury him yet. I want him to dig his own grave, to fall in himself. And when he looks up, he'll see me standing above." Mark got it. He nodded. "So you want to use this to sway shareholders?" "Exactly," I said. "They're already fed up. They just need a solid reason to turn their backs, and I'll give them one. But I have to pick the right person to leak it to first." 3 days later, I had a discreet meeting with Richard Evans, the real estate shareholder who despised Ethan. We sat in a small office, curtains drawn. I placed a few photos on the table, just enough to hint at the truth. Evans looked at them, a smirk forming. "I knew he'd get caught in something like this," Evans said, tapping his fingers on the desk. "What do you want from me, Thomas? I want your vote at the next meeting. When the time comes, I need you to stand with us. Oppose Ethan as CEO. And I want you to whisper a few things to the hesitant shareholders. You know how to make them listen." Evans leaned back, chuckling softly. "A double hit, financial and moral. I like it." He nodded. "You've got my vote. And trust me, the others will listen." Meanwhile, Cole kept digging. A week later, he reported back. Ethan had used company funds to pay for 2 weekend getaways with his mistress, each costing tens of thousands of dollars. I was stunned as I read the statements. This was the missing piece, proof he'd embezzled company money to fuel his affair. Mark sat across from me, his eyes gleaming. "Thomas, this is gold. Shareholders might ignore an affair, but touching company money? He's done." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the statements. "This is the leverage move. If he wants to keep lying, he'll have to spend more, embezzle more, and I'll let him, until it's too obvious for anyone to ignore." I didn't have to wait long. By the end of the month, Ethan held a small meeting with a few shareholders to reassure them. Thanks to Evans, I knew the details. Ethan lied smoothly about new contracts, incoming capital, and once again used my name as a prop. Thomas has always trusted and supported me. My family is united. Hearing this through Evans, I clenched my fists. But I also smiled, because I knew in just a few days that united family would become a punchline. Mark and I agreed. We'd leak a controlled portion of the evidence to a young shareholder, Lisa Howard, known for her principles. When Lisa saw the embezzlement statements, she was livid. My money, our money, used to fund his mistress? I didn't invest here to bankroll his dirty games. Lisa's reaction sparked a chain effect. Within days, I heard 2 other shareholders wanted to get out, or at least demanded a public explanation from Ethan. The whispers spread faster than I'd expected. Ethan must have felt the heat because he started hosting more lavish dinners, trying to hold on to each one. But I knew the more he spent, the more he exposed his flaws. That night, I sat alone, my notebook open wide. I added a new line, leverage, affair plus embezzlement. Below it, I wrote, "No need to strike yet. Let him spin in his own deepening pit until I deliver the final push." I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. In the darkness, I saw myself at that first dinner, used as a prop, branded a burden. But now the roles had reversed. Ethan was becoming the prop in the chess game I'd set up. Soon the entire board would see him stripped bare, no fake smile left to hide behind. The leverage move was on the table, and when it snapped back, it would crush Ethan Carter's entire career. I knew that after deploying the leverage, I just had to wait for the right moment. Then the invitation arrived. Carter Construction's annual shareholder meeting, scheduled for Monday morning on the 20th floor of the headquarters. Ethan would pitch his Save the Company plan, trying to calm those starting to jump ship. For me, this was the fated stage. That morning, I wore my old but neatly pressed black suit, walking into the lobby with a steady stride. The receptionist looked up, about to question me, but Mark Jensen was already there. He presented the authorization showing I was a major shareholder through the shell company. The receptionist glanced again, then politely nodded. "Please proceed to the 20th floor." The elevator hummed as it carried us up, the cables whining steadily. I caught my reflection in the glass-aged face, but eyes sharper than ever. When the doors opened, a red-carpeted hallway led to the meeting room. Inside, it was already crowded, voices buzzing. Ethan stood at the head of the table, exuding confidence, his new suit pristine, his smile polished. When he saw me enter with Mark, he faltered briefly but quickly regained composure. "Well, my dear father-in-law," he said, his tone half mocking, half cordial. "What a surprise to see you here. I thought you were retired." I replied curtly, "I'm here as a shareholder." The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. A few exchanged glances, whispering, Lisa Howard raised an eyebrow while Evans flashed an enigmatic smile. Ethan's brow twitched, but he had no time to react as the meeting began. He launched into his presentation, voice booming. Carter Constructions faces a challenging phase, but with new projects and smart investments, we'll overcome. I've worked tirelessly to ensure a bright future. I sat still, listening. His words were slick but hollow. He spoke of unpermitted skyscraper projects, ongoing funding talks with no concrete proof. I glanced around, seeing some shareholders shake their heads, others studying the papers before them, waiting to pounce. When his presentation ended, Lisa stood first, her voice icy. Ethan, you talk about the future, but what about now? Overdue bank loans, unpaid contractors, and worse, we have proof you used company funds for personal expenses. How do you explain that? Murmurs erupted. Ethan's eyes flashed panic, but he tried to stay calm. Those are baseless rumors. I stood, cutting him off with a low, gravelly voice. Not rumors, these are statements. I pulled a file from my bag, slamming it on the table. The papers showed company card charges, hotels, restaurants, weekend getaways. I scanned the room, then locked eyes with Ethan. He used your money for his mistress. I have photos. I have witnesses. This is how he treats his wife, his family, and you, the people who trusted him with your money. The room exploded. Several shareholders leapt up, angrily talking over each other. Lisa slammed the table. Enough. I didn't invest here to fund your depraved lifestyle. Ethan paled, his voice cracking. You're making this up, Thomas. This is a conspiracy. Evans, from the end of the table, spoke up. No, Ethan. I stayed silent when you screwed me over. But now I'm done. I support a vote to remove you. Nods of agreement echoed. A tidal wave rose in the room, and for the first time, I saw Ethan's polished smile collapse. He tried to recover. Listen to me. I've sacrificed everything for this company. Without me, Carter Constructions will fall apart, I replied coldly. Without you, it might actually survive. The air thickened. The meeting's chair, a veteran shareholder, declared, We'll vote now. Who supports removing Ethan Carter as CEO? Raise your hand. Hands shot up in unison. Lisa, Evans, then one by one the others. I raised mine last, my gaze never leaving Ethan. When it was over, the result was clear, an overwhelming majority. Ethan was no longer CEO. That moment, I'll never forget. His face blanched, lips trembling as if to protest, but no one listened. 2 security guards stepped in per protocol, politely escorting him out. Every eye followed, not with pity, but with cold indifference. Before being led away, Ethan turned to me, his eyes brimming with hatred. You'll pay for this, Thomas, I swear. I stood tall, my voice calm but clear. No, Ethan, you're the one paying, and this is just the start. The door slammed shut behind him. The room fell silent. Then murmurs of discussion resumed. I sank into my chair, the weight of months lifting. Mark touched my shoulder, whispering, You did it. You took back not just your dignity, but his company. I looked at the table, the damning documents still scattered. In my heart, I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. Instead, there was calm. But I knew that calm was victory. Outside the 20th floor window, Dallas's skyline gleamed in the sunlight. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. Ethan thought he'd trapped me in permanent humiliation. But at this very table, before those who once trusted him, I'd torn off his mask. And from today, the game had a new master. Carter Constructions no longer belonged to Ethan Carter. It belonged to me, Thomas Walker, the man he deemed expendable, now the one holding supreme power. In my heart, a single thought rang like the final hammer strike, sealing his career's coffin. The board had decided. Ethan's empire ended here. News of Ethan's ousting spread faster than any storm. Within a day, local papers ran bold headlines. Carter Construction's CEO loses seat in historic vote. Ethan, once a fixture on TV with his slick smile, became a symbol of failure. But I knew he wouldn't go quietly. A cornered animal always lashes out. 3 days later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Ethan's voice came through, hoarse but still trying to sound arrogant. You think you've won, Thomas? You think a stunt in front of shareholders is enough to take me down? I'll show the world you're just a bitter old man making up lies to ruin his son-in-law. I didn't respond, just listened to his ragged breathing like he was swallowing rage. He continued, I'll sue you. Defamation, illegal interference. You've got nothing but a measly pension. I'll take that too. I'll make you regret this. I smiled, replying curtly, Go ahead and sue, but be ready to explain the statements, photos, and texts with your mistress in court. Ethan went silent for a few seconds, then hung up. I thought that was it, but the next day, I got an email from a familiar reporter. An article was being drafted based on a source close to Ethan Carter, claiming I was a schemer trying to seize my son-in-law's company. It even hinted I was exploiting my age for sympathy. Mark called me immediately. This is his desperate move. Don't react yet. We have real evidence. He's got nothing but empty words. The press won't run it without something solid. Sure enough, the article never published. Lisa sent the outlet the statements and affair photos, and they pulled it. The reporter later texted me, "Mr. Walker, sorry for getting dragged in, we'll write the truth." Undeterred, Ethan tried meeting shareholders directly. Evans called me, chuckling as he recounted. He showed up at my office, looking like hell, begging me to retract my vote. Said his father-in-law framed him. But when I asked about the statements, he couldn't answer. "Don't worry, Thomas. He's just digging deeper." In a final desperate move, Ethan called Rachel. I wasn't there, but she told me later. "He got on his knees, Dad," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He cried, said it was all work pressure, begged me to forgive him, said you ruined our family. But I just looked at him and said, 'You ruined it long ago, Ethan.' Dad just brought the truth to light." Hearing this, my heart ached for my daughter, but also eased. Rachel had broken free from his toxic shadow. Ethan didn't vanish right away. He tried posting on social media, accusing me of power-grabbing and betraying family. But the comments below brought up the affair, the embezzlement. His every defense turned into a public joke. I stared at the screen, not gleeful, just seeing a cold truth. He was sinking into the mud he'd dug himself. Mark was right. He's got no power left, just noise, and that noise changes nothing. One evening, I sat by my motel room window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I remembered the day he stood in my living room, smugly sending me away. Now he was the one cast out, not just from the company, but from the glamorous world he'd built on lies. Ethan had fought back, but every move fell flat, and I knew this was just the prelude to the total collapse awaiting him. The day Ethan lost his CEO seat, he still clung to some fake confidence. But a week later, as the truth flooded the press, as every polished word was stripped bare, he became a laughingstock in the business world. I thought he'd slink away, but no. Ethan tried to salvage his image, and that effort pushed him into utter humiliation. That morning, Carter Constructions held its first internal meeting under the new board. I walked in, not for show, just to hear the state of things. The room was packed with employees, many young faces eyeing me with curiosity. Mark stood by, handling formalities. The air buzzed as everyone awaited the leadership's restructuring plan. The door swung open. Ethan appeared. No longer in a slick suit, just a wrinkled shirt and loose tie. His face was haggard, eyes shadowed, but his gaze still tried to hold some pride. A few employees whispered, others turned away. "Everyone," he said, voice hoarse, "don't fall for dirty politics. I'm the one who built this company. You know me. You owe me loyalty." The room went quiet for a moment. Then a young engineer stood, voice calm. "We owe you unpaid wages, unfinished contracts, and the company's reputation you dragged through the mud." Applause started, scattered at first, then thunderous. Ethan paled. He spun toward me, shouting, "You're behind this. You ruined me." I didn't answer, just looked at him. The employees' eyes spoke for me. They no longer believed him. Mark stepped forward, voice firm. "Mr. Carter, you have no authority here. Security." 2 guards appeared. Ethan stepped back, raising his hands like a man about to be arrested. "You can't do this. This is my company, mine." But they took his arms, escorting him out. That image, the former CEO dragged away before dozens of employees who once had to flatter him, was the ultimate humiliation. A few people filmed it, and I knew within hours the video would flood social media. That afternoon, I saw it on the news. The ticker read, "Former Carter Construction CEO escorted from headquarters." Online comments were brutal. Once boasted about a bright future, now dragged out like a thief. Ethan was used to standing on a stage, basking in fake applause. Now he was the target of mocking laughter. I watched the screen, not triumphant, just certain. Things had balanced. He tasted the same humiliation he'd heaped on me, multiplied. That evening, as I left the company, I found Rachel in the parking lot. She was silent for a long time, then said, "Dad, I saw it. I didn't expect to see him humbled like that, but I don't feel happy, just empty." I placed a hand on her shoulder, gently. "That's because you still remember what you lost. But don't forget, it wasn't me or anyone else who made him fall. He planted the seeds himself. We just brought them to light." Rachel nodded, eyes misty. "I just wish I'd learned this lesson sooner." I squeezed her shoulder, saying softly, "Better late than never." That night, alone in my motel room, I opened my notebook and wrote one more line. "The man who cast me out of my home has now been cast out of his empire." That's not luck. That's justice. Outside, Dallas glowed with lights. In me, the fire of rage no longer burned fiercely but smoldered like embers. But I knew the war wasn't over. Ethan still owed me more than dignity. He owed me the years I lost, my daughter's tears, and I still had a few final pieces to play. Ethan had fallen to the depths of humiliation. But for me, this was only the middle of the revenge game. After the humiliating morning when he was escorted out of the headquarters, Ethan vanished from the public eye for a few days. I knew he wouldn't give up easily. But like every sandcastle, when the first wave hits, the rest sweep it all away. And I only needed to sit back and watch his complete collapse. News began to leak. A financial reporter published a series exposing that under Ethan's leadership, Carter Constructions owed tens of millions, with loans secured against the Willow Creek mansion itself. At the same time, images of him being dragged out of the company spread across the internet. His lavish parties and promises of a bright future became a bitter joke. My phone rang constantly. Old friends, former colleagues, even former neighbors called. "Thomas, we saw what happened with Ethan. He brought it on himself." I responded briefly, because I didn't need glory from their praise. What I needed was to see him lose everything he'd once used as a weapon to humiliate me. Rachel came to me, her eyes red. She said Ethan had begged her to take him back. He got on his knees in the living room, Dad, said if I forgave him, everything would be fine. I looked at him and saw a stranger. I stayed silent. Rachel continued, trembling. I refused. I told him he destroyed this family long ago. You just brought the truth to light. I hugged my daughter, feeling her shoulders shake. She was finally free from the darkness. Ethan had lost the most important thing, the blind protection of his own wife. Not just family, his friends turned their backs too. I heard from Frank, an old industry contact. He borrowed from everyone. Now no one takes his calls. Some are even threatening to sue. Then the third blow struck. The bank issued a formal foreclosure notice. The Willow Creek mansion, where I'd been ousted in shame, was listed for seizure. Reading that in the paper, I felt no joy, only a circle closing. That house was once my pride, then Ethan's tool for boasting, now a testament to his blind greed. One afternoon, I spotted Ethan on the street. He wore a crumpled shirt, unshaven, eyes sunken. He stumbled out of a rundown bar, swaying like a man lost. I watched from a distance as he tried calling someone, likely one of his old business friends, but no one answered. He slammed his phone onto the sidewalk, yelling into the traffic. Passers-by glanced back, some snickering. It was the complete opposite of the man who once stood at a lavish party, raising a glass and pretending to care about me. In that moment, I knew he'd fallen entirely, not just losing his company, his money, but the last shred of dignity in the eyes of strangers. That evening, Rachel called. Her voice trembled but was firm. Dad, I filed for divorce. I want nothing to do with him anymore. I listened, my heart both aching and relieved. You did the right thing, I said. Don't let the past hold you back. You deserve a better life. Rachel cried, but this time it was tears of release. And I knew with that decision, Ethan had lost the final thing he thought untouchable, his family. A last message from Cole, the investigator, came like a period at the end of a sentence. Mr. Walker, I followed up as you asked. The mistress ditched him too. Once the company card lost its value, she was gone. He's alone now. I sat still, rereading each word. In my mind, I heard the slam of a door, the familiar sound from the night he kicked me out. But this time, it wasn't my house's door. It was the world closing its doors on him. One morning, over coffee in my motel room, I saw a headline. Ethan Carter files for personal bankruptcy. Below was a photo of him outside court, head bowed, shirt frayed at the shoulders, no trace of his former glamour. The article concluded, from arrogant CEO to penniless, Ethan Carter's freefall took just 3 months. I set the paper down, sighing. He dug his own grave, and I'd only pulled back the curtain to let the light in. There was nothing left to save. That night, I opened my notebook, the final page nearly full. I wrote a brief line. Total collapse. No company, no home, no friends, no family. Ethan Carter. He destroyed himself. Then I set the pen down, looking out the window. Dallas's light still shone brightly. I sipped my coffee, feeling not triumph, but calm. The war had brought me back to a place I never thought I'd reach. No longer the man cast out, but the one who watched his evictor lose everything. Ethan Carter had fallen completely, and for me that was the fairest verdict. I thought it was over. Ethan was penniless. Rachel had decisively left him. The company no longer bore his name, but fate always saves one final act. It came on a late evening, as I returned to my motel room after a long day of restructuring meetings at Carter Constructions. The door was pounded urgently. I opened it, and there stood Ethan, gaunt, unshaven, eyes bloodshot and hollow. He wore a tattered old coat, as if he'd been sleeping on the streets for nights. He looked at me, half pleading, half wanting to devour me. We need to talk, he growled, his breath reeking of liquor. I didn't move, standing firm in the doorway. You have nothing left to say to me, Ethan. It's all clear. You ended yourself. He laughed hoarsely, devoid of any confidence. You think you've won? You stole my company, my family. Rachel, she left me because of you. This is all your fault. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. No, Ethan. You lost everything because of you. I only brought the truth to light. He pushed past, uninvited, and I let him sit on the rickety chair by the table. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, smoke curling around him. He looked at me like a drowning man clutching at straws. I can start over if you give me a chance. I know you have money, control of the company now. Just let me back in, even a small role. I built it. It's mine. I shook my head. Yours. What did you build it with? My money, my reputation, Rachel's trust in you. You didn't build. You destroyed. He went silent, then suddenly slammed his hand on the table, shouting, You owe me. Without me, you'd just be a lonely old man. I gave you a family, a foundation. I cut him off, voice icy. You gave me a family. You married my daughter and betrayed her. You took my house and used it as collateral. You made me a guest in my own home. And now you dare say I owe you? Ethan froze, sinking back into the chair. His eyes flared, but he had no strength left to argue. A long silence blanketed the room, broken only by the ticking clock. Finally, I spoke. You didn't come here to beg. You came to unload the last of your pride. So hear this clearly, Ethan. I'm not avenging for God. And justice is? You lose everything, as you took from me. Tears welled in his eyes. He bowed his head, trembling hands crushing the half-burned cigarette. Maybe you're right. I ruined everything. But, I swear, one day you'll remember me as more than a loser. I stood opening the door. The Texas night wind blew in, biting cold. You had your chances, Ethan. More than one. And you threw them away. There's nothing left to say. Get out. He stood, stumbling to the door. Before leaving, he turned, eyes weary. You won, Thomas. But that victory, it'll leave you alone for the rest of your life. I didn't answer. The door closed behind him, the hinges creaking softly like a final note. I sat down, an emptiness spreading through my chest. No cheers, no triumph. Just the quiet after a storm. Ethan had admitted defeat, his loser's words sounding like a final curse. But I knew they held no weight. I looked out the window, the highway lights flickering. For a moment I saw myself that night. He kicked me out, suitcase in hand, heart-wrenched. Now the roles had reversed. He was the one leaving in the dark, empty-handed, humiliated. I closed my eyes, exhaling deeply. The battle was over. And Ethan's final words, you won, were proof that justice, at last, had found its place. After that final confrontation with Ethan, I returned to the old chair in my motel room, sitting silently for hours. The cramped room, the yellow light casting my shadow on the wall. The rumble of trucks on the distant highway mixed with my thoughts. Months of tension, sleepless nights collecting documents, secret meetings, step-by-step cornering Ethan, all of it was done. But victory wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the aftermath of a storm, leaving muddy ground and a still sky. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. The motel was just a temporary stop, a trench in the war. Now that the war was over, I needed a new start, not for Ethan, but for myself and Rachel. The next week, I met Mark Jensen in the new Carter Constructions office. The building felt familiar, but this time I entered not as the estranged father-in-law. I walked in as the one in control. Employees greeted me, not with forced politeness, but with cautious respect. I looked around, feeling the weight on my shoulders lighten slightly. Mark handed me a thick file. Thomas, the company can recover, but it'll take time. Cut bad debts, restructure the organization, choose new leadership. He looked up at me. You don't have to run it directly, but you can set the course. Make your name the anchor for trust. I gave a faint smile. I spent my life building with my hands. Now at this age, I want to build with my mind. Do it, Mark. But remember, this company is no longer a place for lying braggarts. It has to be for those who truly work. Mark nodded. I trusted him. The next day, I drove back to Willow Creek. The mansion still stood, but quiet, a foreclosure notice hanging on the gate. I parked, staring at it for a long time. This was once my pride, then Ethan's tool for showboating. Now it was an empty shell. Rachel sat beside me, her eyes misty. Dad, I'm sorry it came to this. I took her hand, my voice soft. Don't apologize. We both learned a lesson. This house isn't a home anymore, Rachel. It's just a shell of bricks. The real home is where we still trust each other. We decided to let the bank handle the mansion. I didn't buy it back. I didn't need it anymore. I had justice, and I knew. Sometimes the best revenge is letting go of what was turned into a symbol of shame. Instead, I used the money from the shares to start a fund. I named it after my wife, the Margaret Foundation. It would provide scholarships for construction students from poor backgrounds but with strong will. I wanted to give young people the chance Ethan never valued. At the fund's announcement, many were surprised. A reporter asked, Mr. Walker, after all your family went through, why choose this instead of living quietly? I looked into the camera, answering, because revenge only matters if it leads to something better. I watched a man lose everything to greed and betrayal. I don't want that repeated. Justice isn't just toppling the wicked, it's building up the good. Rachel moved to a small house near me in a quiet Dallas neighborhood, bringing the few keepsakes we had left. I visited often, sometimes sharing simple dinners. In those moments, I felt the warmth we'd lost for so long. One evening, she whispered, Dad, it feels like we've finally come home. I just smiled. She was right. No mansion, no fame, just trust and family. As for Ethan, I heard little, just scattered reports. His bankruptcy was approved. Some creditors still pursued him. Some said he left Dallas, destination unknown. Others claimed he was living off distant relatives in a small town, or wandering, jobless. I didn't care. Life had delivered his verdict. He didn't need me to keep watching, but sometimes in quiet nights, I recalled his final look in the motel room, weary, bitter, mixed with a curse. You'll live alone for the rest of your life. Each time I wondered, did he realize he was the truly lonely one? A month later, we held a small press conference at Carter Constructions. I stood at the podium facing dozens of employees and reporters. This time, I wasn't a prop, not the expendable old man at the end of the table. I was the one telling the true story. I was stripped of my home, cast out of my own house, I began. But from that failure I learned, home isn't in brick walls or fame, it's in honesty, in those who stand up when truth is hidden. That's why we're here today. The applause was thunderous. I looked down at the seats, seeing Rachel smile, tears in her eyes. That night, back at the motel, I packed my things. I knew I'd leave this place, no longer needing a trench. A small apartment in a quiet neighborhood was ready. As I closed my suitcase, I looked at the old notebook filled with revenge plans. I flipped to the last page, writing a brief line. The revenge is complete, but from the ashes, a new beginning is being built. I closed the book, tucked it into a drawer, and left the room for the last time. On the drive home, the Dallas night breeze felt cool. I looked at the glowing buildings, no longer a stranger to them. They were just the backdrop to my story. The story of a father cast out, who returned stronger, not just reclaiming dignity, but building something lasting. A future for the next generation. Ethan thought I was too old, too weak to fight back. But he forgot. I'd built a life with my hands, and no one could take that away. Now, looking back, I know. I'm no longer the man kicked out in the night. I'm the one who turned humiliation into a legacy. And that's the permanent consequence Ethan must bear. Not just losing everything, but living forever in the shadow of my victory. In the story, Thomas Walker, a father forced out of the home he built by his own son-in-law, endured days of humiliation and loss, then quietly planned to reclaim justice. Ethan Carter, the man who cast him out, ultimately lost his company, his family, and society's respect. Set in today's United States, the story reflects many realities, using assets as collateral for risky ventures, the culture of showing off at parties or on social media, and the swift collapse of reputation when truth is exposed. The biggest lesson here is honesty and responsibility. Ethan failed not just from greed, but from constantly hiding the truth, from embezzling company funds, to sustain an affair, to fabricating a story about his father-in-law's willing retirement. In a society like America's, which values transparency, lies may bring short-term gains but face brutal rejection when evidence emerges. Thomas won not because he was more cunning, but because he held the truth and persisted with it. The advice for us all is, build your career and family relationships on honesty and gratitude. If you're a leader, don't let your company or family become tools for boasting. See them as responsibilities to protect. If you're a child, never forget what your parents sacrificed, because ingratitude not only ruins relationships but leads to your own downfall. In America's competitive, spotlight-filled society, the only thing that keeps you standing long-term is integrity. Once lost, it's gone forever. Thank you for following this gripping revenge story to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey of justice. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring real-life stories behind dazzling smiles and buried secrets.